This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
Thanks for tuning in to my conversation with the great Stuart Anstis. He was the guitarist in Cradle of Filth from around 1994 or 1995 to 1999, appearing on the two albums that matter. I'm talking about Dusk and Her Embrace and Cruelty and the Beast. That is the band's. Well, Danny Filth himself calls it the game changer. I think it's a magnum opus. Nick Barker, though, thinks it's a bit of a flawed magnum opus. You can go and have a listen to that chat because I've spoken to him about it all. But regardless, the songs are just the high watermark in the group's catalogue. The conversation was recorded back in September of 2017. It was first broadcast by community radio in Brisbane, that being 4ZZZ, back when I had the Scars and Guitars radio show. So I had Scars and Guitars, the podcast series, and Scars and Guitars, the radio show. Ever since it's been posted, it has gone on to become easily the show's most listened to episode. And I get more mail about it than all other episodes combined. It just shows that there is massive interest out there regarding Stuart and that era of Cradle of Filth. Something else, someone started a Reddit thread about this episode. Fair enough. I live in a democracy, and I'm assuming the person who created the thread does as well. You can do and say what you want, but just keep a few things in mind. I conducted this conversation near to the beginning of my podcast Odyssey, and my intention was to go and edit it, but that'd ruin it. It's a dynamic conversation. It ebbs and flows. If I remove a bit, it might not, well, it might affect what happens later on in the chat. So I just left it all in. At one point, Stuart even stops to answer his phone. That's how intact the entire conversation is, from the hello to the goodbye. You get all of it. So I just wanted to give you that context. Enjoy. Go and get something to drink, perhaps something to smoke, relax. If you're driving, maybe don't do those things. Keep your eyes on the road or whatever. But enjoy the conversation, because it was a thrill for me to actually talk to Stuart. He's a bloody good bloke, it must be said. And what shouldn't need to be said is that his contribution to the band certainly helped Danny on his way to making Cradle of Filth, or turning the band into one of the most popular black metal outfits of all time. So here he is, the great Stuart Anstis.
Hello, Andy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Good, mate. How's things?
Oh, normal for a Monday. Excuse me, I'm just going to turn my music off.
No worries.
My phone is fucking useless on Skype, but I'll do my best for you.
No, you're right, mate. Actually, you're coming through loud and clear. So, yeah.
Oh, cool. Let me see if I can switch to speakerphone, because that normally works better.
No worries.
No, that's not happening. I'll just have to hold it.
Cool, mate. Well, look, mate, this is an honour and a privilege. I've got to tell you, I've been a fan of yours for a very long time. So, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to the interview.
Well, thank you. I'm still getting used to being appreciated, because 20 years ago it didn't happen. I've had loads of fantastic messages from people, like, especially Australia, actually, where I think I visited once.
You did once, and I was in the crowd then, actually.
It's a great place. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
it was only Sydney and Melbourne, but they were excellent shows. Excellent shows.
They were, actually. Look, I'll let you know, just very coincidentally, mate, I mean, what I do for a living these days is I'm also a musician. I'm a bass guitarist and a guitarist, so I play in cover bands around town. But the other thing that I do is I am a journalist and I interview musicians, and lo and behold, an interview that I had the other night was with Danny himself. So I was able to...
Enlightening stuff.
Yeah, well, mate, we're able to talk a little about your good self, and there wasn't a bad word said. I'll let you know that now. I have posted the podcast, the interview.
Really?
Yeah, no, there wasn't. I think I don't know him at all, so don't get me wrong. I only know him through his music. But I remember reading the media back in the day where the exit, yourself and Les exited the band maybe not under the greatest circumstances, and I thought he'd bite my head off, to be honest with you, but he was willing to have a chat, and I flew your flag very highly because, in my view, the two best black metal albums ever recorded, in my view, are Dusk and also Cruelty, and
wow, thank you.
They're very high, but a lot of that comes down to your contribution.
that wonderful new wave of British heavy metal style guitar playing that you introduced to the band. And I didn't say this to Danny, of course, but I thought Midian was atrocious, the album that they released after
I think that was probably the last time I heard a Cradle of Filth record. And hand on heart, Andy, I was taking a call from somebody and I just had rock radio on in the background. I said to my mate, I've got to turn this shit off. It's fucking diabolical sub-grindcore rubbish coming in on this guy's call. And then it finished and they said that was the new record from Cradle of Filth. All right.
Yeah, it's. I think when you left, a lot of the melody was taken away from the band. Paul Allender isn't. He might be technically a very skilled guitarist, but he isn't a creative guitarist, and that's really what you are. You're a very creative guitarist.
Well, yeah, because otherwise you end up doing the same thing 100 times. Black metal, even back then, was getting quite mono, and so it was always about looking for something different to do. Because Barker was always going to go lightning fast. And they were the bits that were really challenging, I thought. Right, we could go lightning fast and thrash some chords in the Dark Throne style, or we can try and do something. But yeah, it was, making Cruelty especially was fraught at best. It was really, really hard work. But yeah, lots of people say that's their favourite record. Genuinely, Andy, I haven't listened to it since it was released, or Dusk, or
Serious?
Vampire, or... No,
wow.
Because I was, it was a lot of work, and then you go on tour and you're playing the songs every night. What I've always been excited about with music is writing and doing the next thing. So, as soon as one thing finished, I was always a cassette 4-track dork when I was a kid. And so I would just run away, start having new ideas, and then I was ready for the next thing to write. That's what I get a kick out of. It's why I own a guitar. For whatever else I do with it, it's because I wanted to write music.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, fair enough, mate. And look, I just want to, before we talk about we will talk about what you've been up to, but just from the listener's perspective, I've got listeners all over the world, mate, so this will be released as part of my podcast series, and I'll also air it as a part of my radio show in Brisbane, which is aired locally here in Brisbane. But you are an integral part of Cradle of Filth's history, given your contribution to the 1996 release Dusk and Her Embrace. We've already talked a little bit about Cruelty and the Beast, which is obviously my favourite album, and something that's very overlooked as well, which is the 1999 follow-up EP to Cruelty and the Beast, From the Cradle to Enslave. So before we talk about those three things, because my gosh, I've got a lot of questions to ask you about your contribution and your thoughts, and even as you reminisce, if you like, on that period of your career and your contribution to Cradle, what have you been up to in the years since? Because it's almost been 20 years.
I tried to get some music together, but what I found, I didn't find the right people to work with. Where whatever people will say about me, I'm not any kind of a leader. I love doing teamwork. And I kept finding myself in the same position where you push on, have a load of great songs. Because the missing bit for you, I guess, is not to go over all the shit that happened way back, but I'd already written more material for the next album after Cruelty than we had to start Cruelty with, genuinely. And I thought, well, no, I'm not doing a Cradle of Filth redux. They exist. They can go and do their own thing. I wanted to do something else. So I started writing again, and I was still really enjoying it. But everybody just drags. It's maybe it's me, Andy. I like to work. What I always say to my guitar students is I'm really, really lazy. So what I do is I work incredibly hard to get to that bit of the day when I can stop and chill out and watch a movie or put some music on or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I do intense bursts of work, where I think a lot of people quite like the ephemera of making a record, the hanging out and doing stuff, where you can hang out and do whatever with your mates whenever. Another thing I say to my students is you've got to choose whether you're hanging out with your mates or playing music. So it's always been the centre of what I do, but not in a 9-to-5 job sort of way. It's I kept getting stuck in a position where it wouldn't go forwards how I wanted it to go, where it doesn't matter how well I write a song, I always want input from the people I'm working with, and I especially want to pound it around a rehearsal room until it sounds real, if you get my drift on this.
Sure do,
A song that's been played in live, you're a musician yourself, the first time you fire a tune out, it's all a bit cagey and everybody's looking for their cues. The 100th time you do it, it's alive.
Yep.
That's what I was looking for. So, and then my fabulous children started to turn up, and so I ran a guitar shop for 10 years or more, because I like all the techie stuff as well. I love working on valve amps and always looked after my own guitars.
Yes.
And went home to where I'm from, little town by the sea. And my children are older now, so I have more time for music. And we'll talk about it later, but I have lots on at the moment.
Yeah, cool, mate. Yeah. So you're in, I've just read the bio, what I could find online, because to be honest, mate, there's not a lot out there about you online, unfortunately. But what I found was that you're in Bastard Son, and also you've got your current band, and it's Ninepence, I think is the correct pronunciation. Is that right?
Ninepence, yeah.
Yep. Gotcha. Tell us about,
really enjoying it.
Yeah, tell us about Bastard Son first, because I found an old Blabbermouth entry from 2003.
That was the project for the songs I wrote after I came out of Cradle of Filth, which was not dissimilar to what I'm doing now. But for a boring legal reason, those songs are now trapped in the ether because of the publishing contract I had. If I record them now, I have to jump through 5 million hoops. And as I say, I write music. I suppose I write music every day. It's like a muscle. If you work it out, it gets better. And so those songs, they have escaped. But there are also songs out there that somebody said, "Is that you?" I said, "Well, no, it's just somebody said it's me to try and get a hit on their website." So hopefully one day I'll be in a position to finish it, because that was the last twin guitar project that I did. And I've always written for 2 guitars. But Ninepence, it went down from 5-piece to 3-piece, and it worked. And so we stayed like that.
And that's more of when I'm not trying to put it into a box, but more of a Doom-related project. And I've got to compliment you here. Your vocals to me sound like mid-period Aussie circa The Ultimate Sin, which I'm a massive fan of.
Well, that's huge. A few people have said that, and that's mind-blowing, where I was never the frontman of that band.
Right, yeah.
It was a stitch up a right word the guys I play with would understand. We were going to share the vocals. And I think I sang one song and they all announced I'd passed the audition, and it stuck.
You've got to be careful.
I did used to sing in bands when I was a kid. So, 10, 15-year break didn't do me any harm.
You've got to be careful being too competent, haven't you, sometimes?
What do you mean, Andy? That's a strange thing.
Oh, meaning that, we talk a little bit about taking on extra. Well, I know in my band, okay, so we talk about taking on extra work. Sometimes you don't realise what you can do. So I'm more known for my backing vocals, okay, but I've got to tell you, sometimes there are some songs where I can take the lead vocal, but do I want to take on that stress every night? That's what I mean by that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. I love playing music, so I play other instruments as well, but very rarely have I been brave enough to do it in public, or let alone in a band. But it's not about competence. Me and Rob Van Hughes, the drummer in Ninepence, are simpatico. We have never had a row in the 10 years we've played together. Mm-hmm. And so it makes writing and playing an absolute joy. So it's more about what does it take to do the thing that we imagined. Mm-hmm. That's what the guitar's about for me. You need to be 1% better than your imagination is asking for, I think.
Yes, okay. Now, talking about your guitar, I'll ask this question before it just flies away. Have you still got that BC Rich that you played on the Australian and the American tour with the Union Jack down the bottom?
Yes. Wonderful. Yeah, I still use it sometimes. It might be coming out of retirement and actually getting used this year, but it's early days on that project. The guitar you heard on the album, though, was never that BC Rich.
Right. What was it that you played?
It was a Jackson guitar that I had when I was about 18. My parents bought it for me. It was my first good guitar. Not a super handmade one. It's a Japanese one that I've looked after, and still play that one as well. But all the guitars on Vampire, all the guitars on Dusk, all the guitars on Cruelty is that one guitar, mate.
Is that right? There you go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's probably not a guitar you'd probably want to tour with. Then I'd probably suggest. Is that the reason why it was a BC Rich Warlock, if I'm not mistaken, the one with the Union Jack down the bottom of it?
Yeah. It was a custom build that they made for me. It's a beautiful thing. Where one of the great days of my life, I suppose, was me and Nick Barker were hanging out at my flat, where for some reason we didn't have anything to do one night, and the phone rang, and this guy said, "Oh, it's Dave from BC Rich. Apparently you want a guitar making." And we'd had a couple of drinks, and I thought somebody is taking the piss out of me. Mm-hmm. And so we talked, and it seemed real. And he said, "Well, you can have anything you want." I said, "Well, what I want is," and I rattled off all these things. And he said, "But we don't do that." And Dave, you said I could have anything. And so it's a bolt-on neck Gibson fingerboarded Fender Stratocaster necked, like the 62 with the bump on the back style neck.
Sure.
I've always found that the most comfortable with DiMaggio pickups. The only change it's had over the years is I changed my mind about which Floyd Rose I prefer. Where I'm sure you've seen pictures, if you follow the band back then, I used to hold it over my head by the tremolo arm, and it wears and tears quite quickly then.
Okay, yeah.
So if you play a Goto, you can do that every day and it will come back. The old Takuchis couldn't do it. But yeah, it's they made me a free guitar on the grounds that I played that as my primary guitar live, I think. And so a lot of press photos, I'm sure you know, would be done in like the first 2 or 3 songs, so that, I don't know why actually. It used to be the first 2 or 3 songs, there'd be people in the press pit taking pictures. My guitar tech, my excellent and still working guitar tech, Stevie Firth from back then, if he thought I looked like I could do with a little boost if the sound on stage wasn't happening, he'd pass me the Jackson out. Where I'm sure you've played one of those old Jackson Fusions. They're light as a feather. That BC Rich is like wearing a brick.
It's like a bass, like playing a bass, isn't it, in terms of the weight?
Yeah. They're both wicked guitars. They're totally different instruments. But yes, it's so reliable. It's so stable. I still use the Jackson when I'm teaching now. So that was why it was the studio guitar. Its intonation was always bang on.
Tell us about your teaching then. You mentioned that a couple of times. So do you teach school-age students, or is your tutelage open to anybody?
I don't take students in much before kind of secondary school age, purely because it's expensive and your parents are paying for it. And in the past, I've had to say, I don't think your money is being put to good use.
Sure. Yeah.
Till that age, because this is what I was. There was a guitar in the house. I played with it as a toy. About 12 years old, I started saying, can I have an electric? And because my older sister had blown out her guitar lessons, I had to learn how to play a Spanish guitar it nearly had 3 or 4 strings on the thing. And all it was is I had to be able to play the top line from Cavatina, and my family would invest in cheap guitar for me. And so I say to all my younger students, just sit and play with it. You can't break music. You know, you can get it wrong 1,000 times before you get it right. And that's what it's all about, is the adventure of getting there and finding out what you do. So, somewhere around, my very best student I met when he was 15, and he's a super high achiever. It doesn't matter who tutored him. He would have been amazing, whatever. And he'd done the same thing. There was a guitar in the house and he played and played. And then same as me, eventually he thought, right, I need some lessons. When I was about 16, I was lucky enough to study with, if you're a guitar dork, you'll know this name, Tim Mills from Bare Knuckle Pickups.
Yeah, not familiar with the name, to be honest with you. Tell us about him.
He's one of the cleverest people I know. He's frighteningly smart, Tim. But back then he was our local guitar teacher. He was the best of the guys you could get. And so whenever I could, I studied with him. And I learned a great deal from him. He's got one of the most amazing aggressive picking styles. And I suppose, crucially, he was the first person that showed me how to do an Iron Maiden style twin guitar thing.
That is...
And still friends now. He's a really good guy.
Cool, mate. All right. Well, look, what I'd like to do now is let's talk a little bit about Dusk and Her Embrace, if you will. So I got into Cradle primarily through your guitar playing, but I actually didn't realise that until after you'd left the band and Gian stayed on with Paula Lender for the album that I've already spoken about, the one that was released in 2000, Midian, which, of course, as I've said, I thought was rather weak. Now, the guitar playing on Midian lacked finesse and character, and it was then that I went back and I really identified that it was your guitar playing over Gian's on the previous 3 releases that I really enjoyed. So I think the best way for me to gain insight into the detail to your contribution to Cradle of Filth is to start with Dusk. And it's a very interesting album, as it was recorded originally with 2 other guitarists prior to your recruitment. Then, due to some label complications with Cocophonus, I think it was shelved and re-recorded with your playing alongside of Gian. Now,
it was partially re-recorded. The drums are the same drum takes.
I didn't know that. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there may be something else you don't know, but carry on, Andy.
So, look, the difference between the 2 versions is enormous. So, Cocophonus eventually released the first recording of Dusk and Her Embrace as the original Sin in 2016. And again, it lacks flair and I'm going to use the word ceremony of the version that you appeared on. So I guess my question would be, how did you approach recording the album? Were you given license to record the existing guitar lines as you wanted, or was Danny or Kit Wolven issuing instructions on tone and phrasing, etc.?
No, I was pretty much given a clear run at it. Now, obviously, it would be ignorant of me to ignore the signature riffs that were there, because that's the song, but I did build a great deal on them. What I had was a cassette of half-mixed versions of what was released by Cacophonous, whenever it was you said a couple of years ago. The guitars were, on some tunes, panned hard left and right, and what I would generally do is, this is not a judgment on anybody, I'd switch off Paul Allender and listen to Paul Ryan. Paul was still is an excellent rhythm guitar player. And so that was the body that I worked from. And so I'd sit there with one earpiece in, play along, get the tunes down. There wasn't a great deal of rehearsal because Nick wanted to keep the original drum tracks, which is fine. And so what I did do is Kit made me work unbelievably hard. I've never been put to work so hard. And something that I'd like to clear up is I think Kit did a fantastic job on that album.
Agreed. Yeah.
The sound of it was amazing. Officially, we all had to say, well, the production is lacking somehow. And I went along with it to try and make it look like that band wasn't broken and there was some sense of unity. But the reality is Kit was fantastic, where he was so good. You didn't say, why am I doing this, Kit? He just did it, listened back to it, heard the results, kept moving. And it was his doubling techniques were new to me. That fatness of the guitars was extraordinary that he achieved. And it sounded like that straight off the tape. There's not a lot of trickery. He just made me work for it. And I think I might have taken 2 guitar solos on that album. There's a solo in a tune called Beauty Slept in Sodom. And it's not quite what I planned. I took the cassette 4-track to another room in the studio, went over the backing a few times, and I would put solos and things like that in during the vocal sessions when Dan needed a rest. And I did one take of it. And I said, can I do it again, Kit? I missed, that was supposed to be a big epic sweep to make me look awesome in there. And I just treated it as a guide. And he said, mate, you're not doing it again. You'll never play it that well. And didn't argue with him. And what he did to try and talk me into keeping that take, where he's worked with amazing guitar players. He knows what he's doing.
Yep.
He said, people are going to go away and learn that. And that wasn't the hook that got me to keep that take. I just believed him. This was at the end of 10, 11 days tracking with him. And you thought, this guy knows what he's on about. Let's do it. He's the producer. That's how this is supposed to work. And maybe 2 years ago, an Italian dude sent me a video and said, could you tell me out of 10 how close I got this solo? And he was rocking an easy 9.5. He had the pickup changes and everything down. And I just thought, you know what, Kit was right. Somebody learned that one. And this guy nailed it note for note. It was amazing. In fact, he probably played the last bend a little better than me because he got to do it more than once.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, gotcha. His Kit was spot on. It is the closest album from the era, in my view, that you would call a Guitar Hero album, where there are riffs and there's certainly plenty of solos from your good self that you do want to emulate. And I know that because I tried, but I'm a much better bass player than I am a guitarist. And I definitely cite Mantis as my most significant influence as a guitarist, to be honest with you, Mantis and Cawthorn. So I'm nowhere near the level of expertise of your good self. But that doesn't surprise me in the least. And certainly probably my favourite, or one of my favourite black metal guitar lead breaks are the lead breaks that are through Funeral in Carpathia. Now, they weren't on the original Sin version, so the version that was originally recorded. Is that all your good self playing those lead breaks on there, or is that Gian as well?
I think what we need to talk about here is John isn't on that album at all.
Okay.
He joined the band after the guitars were recorded.
So it's your good self, yep.
Yeah, so if you take a little step back here, what happened was I joined that band and I played a load of shows before anybody knew who I was. And I thought, well, John can have his picture on the album cover as long as it's made clear he didn't play guitar on it. And, of course, Dan only heard half of what I said because he was about to undertake, was it like 9 months of touring? And, you know, I just wanted him to fit in. And so he had his picture on there, but he didn't play a note on there. Everything from that session, all the album tracks, and did we do a Slayer cover in the same session? John wasn't there when it was done.
Yeah, Hell Awaits. Yeah, that was you playing on that as well. Yeah.
That was Dan's big contribution, actually, Hell Awaits. I could not get a guitar. We wanted to sound like we were super teenagers, like we were 14 again, doing a Slayer song, but doing it properly. And my amp at the time was a 5150. And I couldn't get that bedroom brutal thrash metal sound that we all had in our heads when we were kids. And I sent Dan in there and he adjusted the tone controls while I played a riff. And that's how he got, because he doesn't play guitar, he doesn't play music as far as I know.
Yep. And
he gave it that, my first thrash metal evil sound, which I actually recall is quite a good sound as it comes out. I don't think Kit was as involved in that. I think that was Mike X that recorded that one. Might be wrong though.
Okay.
But it was a slightly different session, the Slayer song. But yeah, John's not on that album. Any guitars that are on there I play.
Well, that clears that up then. I didn't know that, actually. I figured because I'd watched enough of live videos that are posted from the era on YouTube, because back in those days, there was no YouTube, and you guys the band didn't release any official videos until there was a bootleg quality live recording of Cruelty Bought the Orchids that MTV used to play occasionally. Do you remember that?
Oh, in the studio one?
No, it's a live version of it. It's I was really surprised that they released it actually, because the band's music at the era is so vast and bombastic, and the recording sounded quite narrow. Of course, it was live, and it sounded like it was recorded with a microphone and a video camera. But MTV
I don't know what's
started
happened to it now, but there was an abandoned live album, as I recall. So maybe it's from that, because it really didn't come out that well. It just wasn't happening the way it was recorded. So possibly it's something from there. But no, we did a thing for MTV where we played, I think that was actually for the Dusk album, 2 or 3 songs in the MTV studio that we used as promo.
Oh, wow. That'd be awesome to get hold of that. Yeah.
Oh, they're on YouTube. Somebody sent me a link maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So they're out there. It was Malice Through the Looking Glass, probably Funeral in Carpathia, and I'm fairly sure we did 3 songs. So we had to set up like we were live, but with no audience. That was the first time I ever had to do anything like that. It was weird.
Okay, now I can't find. Look, you know how it is with the internet. I mean, a lot of the information you really need to see that it's authored by somebody who has some credibility, and I can't find a lot of reliable information about the tours or promo to support Dusk and Her Embrace. But as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, I did see you guys. I was one of the few people that was in, when I say few, there was a couple of hundred of us, in the Sydney show, at the Sydney show in 1997, at the very well-intentioned but poorly organised Sydney show. You might remember that one as you went on stage closer to 1 a.m, I think, and it was a very long night for both bands and punters. What do you remember about that show, and what do you remember about your Australian tour?
I really liked Australia, mate. You know, especially in Melbourne, because we had more time to go out and wander around and explore. It's like the part of the world that I'm from has escaped and formed an excellent republic on the other side of the world. Everybody's sort of open and frank. I tell everybody this when I praise my time in Australia. This little old lady who must have been in her 70s that ran the guest house we stayed at, I was all out of sync with jet lag. And so I think it was me and Les walked down and said, "Have you got a tourist map, love?" And she said, "Yeah, I got fucking shitloads, mate. How many do you want?" And I thought, I like this country already.
Sounds about right.
And so, it was, you know, it's always easier to go somewhere where people speak English as a first language, because I'm not going to get into I'm not very good with language. And so I wasn't going to get into any bother and get lost like I did in a couple of places. And everybody we met was cool. We had a great time. So I didn't get a chance to really look around Sydney, but I do remember the show. I think, in fairness, the Melbourne show was better. It was a nicer venue, and it wasn't 1 a.m. with loads of shit going wrong during the day.
Yes.
I've got a mate in Geelong who would tell you exactly where that place was, but I've forgotten the name of the venue now. But that was a really, really good show.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was a privilege to be there, to actually go and play Australia. That's as far away from home as a little lad from the West Country could ever get.
Well, I don't think we could actually, you know, the local fans could actually believe that you guys were touring, because it felt a little bit like, and bear with me here, it felt a little bit like when Nirvana broke and they toured Australia in 1992. It felt like we had this black metal colossal, because remember, that was an era when not black metal. Black metal was probably the blue chip or the blue ribbon genre for heavy metal at that time, at least commercially speaking. But that was an era when Pantera were coming apart at the seams. That same year, Max had split from the rest of the guys in Sepultura. Nobody knew what was going on. Maiden had released an atrocious album with Blaze Bayley, or about to release an atrocious album with Blaze Bayley called Virtual 11, which, as far as I'm concerned, did them a lot of damage. I think Blaze seems like a wonderful human being, but was a completely inappropriate singer for that band. And you guys, more or less, Cradle of Filth in that era more or less came and took that vacant metal crown along with another band called Strapping Young Lad, you know, the Devon Townsend project. There's really both of you guys. And we had, earlier in the year, we saw Strapping Young Lad, and then Cradle of Filth came out. It felt like as though we were witnessing something that was similar to what happened in 1992 when Nirvana broke. So I think I think your excitement about being in Australia was matched by punters, myself included, of course, obviously myself being a part of that. I was just excited to see the band. I wished you guys played for 3 hours. Not that I think you could have done it at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it was a very special event to see you guys down in Australia at that time.
We knew how privileged we were getting to visit you guys. We really did. It was, we used to talk about this a lot. If you don't give it absolutely everything every time, we've just robbed the people that were us 5 years before. You know, me and Barker, we grew up going to every metal show we could go to. And so that's why it was never any bother to push on, do the extra bit. I would have liked to have played longer. But for whatever reason, the set never, ever exceeded 80 minutes for that band. You know, it's...
okay.
But,
Maybe...
no, I mean, it's different for us because we were in the centre of it. And hearing you say... I mean, what a huge compliment. You know, that metal was on its ass, and then us and strapping young lad turn up and give it some life. That's what we all dreamed of when we were young. You know, me and Barker still joke that we fought in the grunge wars. There was no metal in Europe. And so we went out and played to 8 people in a city up north and 12 people somewhere else. And then, however it worked, suddenly there was a shitload of people at shows. You know,
I remember reading, I had a subscription at the time to Guitar World, and I remember they did a very small feature on you guys in 1997. Again, it was almost unheard of to see a metal band, yet alone a black metal band, in their pages. But they made a really interesting point where they were talking about the volume of Cradle of Filth T-shirts that were seen at metal shows through the era. Now, talking a little bit about the branding or the marketing strategy, how close were you to the ideas that were on T-shirts? Because I had a fair few of the T-shirts myself through the year. I've given them all away now. I wish I'd held on to some of them. But the designs were rich, they were colourful, and they were different from a lot of the, you know, the dragons and skull and crossbones of just about every other black metal band at the time. Your artwork featured a lot of females. Yeah. Were you... You're right,
I was involved more with how they worked early on than maybe by the time the Cruelty album came out, where it had become a bit of a sausage factory, where there was a definite way these things were done. Some of the early ones were fantastic. Where, you know, not to pin it down so that anybody gets a cease and desist or a big bill from a photographer. One of those shirts was made of pictures that me and Dan cut out of books that we owned and just sent them to a printing company and hoped for the best. Jesus, and I still think it's the nicest T-shirt that was produced back then. Probably the one that was produced in the shortest numbers because we didn't pay anybody for the artwork. So.
Yeah, gotcha.
But no, it's, they were remarkable things because the lurid colours. This is, you know, if you're familiar with us, one of the things that we all had in common was the old Technicolor horror movies. We all grew up on those, and that lurid nature really worked on me because everything had gone. The Norwegian guys were all black and white and, like, say, skulls and dragons and all the hardcore stuff, the machine head thing that was going on back then. It was just different. And so I wouldn't lay claim to any of the ideas. But, we all used to chip in with stuff like that early on. We all used to take part in everything was the key. There was no identifiable leader, I promise you, Andy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, it was, I mean, obviously, you know, in 2017, Danny's smack bang in the middle of what happens in the band. But back in those days, it was more of a collective. Would you describe it as a democracy?
Yes, it was a democratic process. And I was always happy to go, you can't win them all, mate. That's the nature of democracy. But yeah, we were always happy to work on what was there. So an opportunity, a challenge, whatever it was comes up. The main thing was to be making music because without that, those T-shirts are irrelevant, aren't they? And so, some people were more passive than others. But when it came to a big decision, it was done democratically back then. Some people can't take a democratic loss quite as well as others, I suppose, is what the problem was.
Yeah, gotcha. And mate, I'm at the point now where I'm going to ask you about the big one, Cruelty and the Beast. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not just Cradle of Filth's masterwork, but it's up there. This album and Nemesis Divina by Satyricon are the best blackish metal albums ever released, as far as I'm concerned. And your contribution, I hear it as being significant on this album. So tell me all about the songs that you wrote or which band members you collaborated with on the album.
Barker. Me and Barker would play for fun. You know, if there was noise to be made, we would make it, and that's where a lot of those ideas come from. There were some sort of formal written things that were done. Here's an interesting one. What I think is probably one of the best tracks on that album, although most people disagree, is "Twisted Nails of Faith." It was a changing world. My cassette 4-track couldn't cut it anymore, so we were all going towards digital stuff to write with. And I bought this crazy little drum machine called a Boss DR5 that was built for guitar players. Do you remember them?
I do. Yep.
Yeah. And I showed Dan how it worked. And I put it on a string and that that's Dan's legitimately one of two times he contributed a musical idea rather than just vocals to something. Mm-hmm. And so it was a full track sequencer. And so you could put your power chord shapes down, and the signature line for that song was written there. And then it has that extended break at the end, which was a change that Greg came up with in a groove that me and Barker put underneath it. Probably what works best, Andy, is if you pick out a song, it might nudge me and I'll recall. I've got a strange memory. It's all in there. Well, but if you give me a push, I'll probably be able to pull something out for you.
Let me see here. Well, Cruelty Bought the Orchids, I think, has got one of the strongest riffs that was ever released by the band, and that's certainly saying something. So the opening riff that then goes into the verse.
Yeah. Well, that's similar. That again, a minority contributor to writing was John. We never called him Jan. I think his real name is Gian Piero, but he was just John to us.
John, okay, yep.
And he came in. I'm going to tell you the whole story. John didn't write very much, and we found it frustrating. And I'll link you into something else, because it's also on that record. I think it's in 13. Is there a track called 13 Autumns on there?
Let me think about it. I don't think there is. 13 Autumns and a Widow. Yes, there is. That's that's the second track. Yep.
Yeah. Well, John came in with a kind of Norwegian black metal thing going on, and I don't know if you've ever looked at a tab for that tune. There's a little not a power chord, a dyad that inverts itself on the fingerboard is what makes it drive.
The opening sequence. Yeah,
and he was playing it as a blast riff, and as luck would have it, me and Barker, as we often did, would begin our day, because he used to give me a ride over to the rehearsal space, with some quality old metal. And I believe that day there was something with that crunchy stamping groove. Maybe we had Bathory on or something that day. And so we applied that crunching groove to this quite ordinary black metal riff, and it comes together as the riff that you hear. So it was team stuff. There's very little you could say was one person. There was always an initial idea, but the more I think of it, the more it was an interaction between people. That band was always a bit broken, Andy, and so there's nothing that was all six people working together. That, as far as I can remember, but there were lots of threes and fours, because of course we liked playing the most. Me and Nick would be in the rehearsal room first playing Iron Maiden covers and stuff like that, just to get warmed up. And so every idea in there comes from somewhere. I actually found a cassette of, I don't know what you call them. They were demos that we had to make as evidence for our label that they would give up the money for us to make Cruelty and the Beast. And it's just me, Nick, and Rob playing bass. And you fucking hell, that's how that song started. There's that really long tune, Bathory Aria.
Yep.
There was such an early version that I can't recall where we were with keyboard players. If Les was in the band, Les was in the band at the time, who's still a great mate of mine. He's a good lad, Les, good player. But the intro was actually a picked acoustic guitar. What you hear as a piano on the album was originally a guitar part that I put together.
Nice.
And so this is the thing about writing music. Sometimes you give a part up to somebody else and it works a lot better. The beginning of 13 Autumns and a Widow, the keyboard line, as it stabs in, that was a guitar part that worked better as a keyboard line. Is Les you could go back and forward with quickly. The guy before him,
Damien,
he just couldn't. Greg to us, but I was going to say I can't remember his pretend name, but his mum calls him Greg. He couldn't interact at the same speed as me and Nick. Where we would have accepted a contribution as hold a fucking note down and just give it some keyboards and an idea will start to form. And he couldn't do that. That's ultimately why he wasn't there anymore. So, I mean, even Nick didn't remember doing this. When we recorded Vampire, I had family not far away. And so when I finished my guitars, I took off for a couple of days, came back to see what was happening with the end of the session. And there were loads of sad faces in the control room because the keyboards weren't what they wanted. They weren't those. What was the word you used for that sound? Bombastic or something? We always used to say dramatic and theatrical. And so there was like maybe a 4-octave MIDI controller there. And this was recording on tape. There was one channel left. And so Barker sat down on the left side. I showed him a bass part that he could do with one of his giant fingers. And Rob played some chords in the middle. And I played a melody line on the top of it. And we went back over it. And we all contributed keyboards to that one. It was, like I say, it was a team thing. That's the difference that you hear. It's because it was semi-autonomous groups of people working within a band. So there was always something happening. But anyway, to get you back to what you're talking about, the writing process sort of, I was reminded of it hearing that cassette. I was really surprised I still had it. I was looking for not studio outtakes, but early mixes of songs from Cruelty and the Beast, because they were live. They were just the guides that we played before we started stacking stuff up, and I was curious how they sounded. But it was enlightening to be reminded how it all worked. Just one guitar, bass, drums, and then one song had keyboards on it. And they were early versions close enough to what you hear on the album. They just got rearranged.
So Rob Eagleston, I think that's his name. I mean, his name is, you've got a fake name, I think, in terms of the...
No, apparently that is his real name. It's a cool name, Eagleston, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, okay. It sounds like a name that's been invented for the purposes of theatre. But, yeah, no, that's great. Now, what would you rate him as a bass player? Because I thought he was very similar to the way David Ellefson from Megadeth contributed to Dave Mustaine's work.
Yes, Rob, he used to write some great stuff. And he is a good player. He'd get a bit caught up in the technical nature of music sometimes, where, I mean, now even more so, people are obsessed with technicality, where a very smart guy, probably Kit Wolven, pointed out to me years ago, nobody goes home whistling your delicate arpeggios, play him a melody. And so, yeah, I mean, Rob used to get himself all caught up on, but it's only this. Yeah, but that only this glues the guitars to the drums, which glues to the keyboards, which makes it that massive thing. And honestly, I didn't really know Rob. He was a strange character. I spent years with him. But I couldn't honestly say we were ever mates. We didn't row, but we weren't mates either. But some of his contributions sparked off some of the best music we did, where, on Dusk, the song Malice Through the Looking Glass, I'm sure you noticed, isn't
great
on
track, yeah.
the Redux edition that they did of the demos.
No, it's not, yeah.
That is entirely born from two ideas, which, credit where credit's due, Greg had programmed some sort of keyboard thing that was supposed to be an instrumental that became the main line at the beginning when we added the drums and the riff to it. And my favourite bit of harmony guitar on that album, I guess, is the centre section, which is all keyed from a change that Rob came up with. He just started playing a little bass line and we all went with it. And it happened fast. That was the nice thing. He was a good writer, Rob. Sadly, I didn't get to play guitar on his solo record. I was supposed to be doing that one. But interference and whatnot, where it just didn't happen in the end. But he's a good guitar player as well. Does he still make music, Rob? I haven't heard anything about him for a long time.
Not that I'm aware, to be honest with you. I didn't even know that he'd done a solo album, to be frank. So did he do it under
that solo record was 96, called December Moon. Yeah.
Okay, I'd heard of December Moon. I didn't realise it was a solo effort, though. I just thought it was another band he was in.
Well, he wrote all the music, but he was great mates with he played with Extreme Noise Terror and did some stuff for Cradle of Filth as well.
Yep.
And so it's just those two. But because I love to play, I said, Rob, why don't you let me come and play guitar on it? And he was all for it, and then it didn't happen in the end, sadly. But no, he's a good guy. I won't tell you the story, but I was just having a little chuckle. He was incredibly funny. He had a really odd sense of humour, Rob.
So I think he was the last member of what I'm going to refer to as the classic lineup of the band to exit. Am I right in saying that? Or did Gian, just for the listener's perspective, did John or Gian stay around, might have stayed around for an album or two longer?
I honestly don't know. I don't know. It's people assume that I follow that band, and I really don't. I'm getting on with my own thing. Because Cradle of Filth to me was this lucky and excellent opportunity to make some music and have somebody else pay for the studio instead of having to scrap a couple £100 together and then run off to do a demo somewhere local. We were having a great time doing it, but I don't think Rob stayed around that long. Les is the guy to talk to. He's an excellent historian.
I'm hoping to catch up with him when he tours Australia with Paradise Lost in December, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, I think we've talked about this, but whether it happens or not, I don't know. Between Nick and Les and I, we could probably put together a pretty good history of what went on 96 to 99. And maybe even earlier if we tried, but that's boring. We were just on the dole making music. Well, this is brought. Obviously, I've never read it, but Nick was underwhelmed by the official biography of Cradle of Filth and how it was done.
Painted.
And I said, well, look, we can all. Why don't we just put together the funny stuff? Because if you've spoken to Dan, he's got such a stick up his ass. He can very rarely see the funny side of anything. We have some extraordinarily silly ass stories that we could put together and just let them out there to show that it wasn't quite as straight-faced as people thought. And it'd be nice to do it one day, but I've always said to the other two guys, I absolutely insist, if we're going to do it, all three of us together, because one will jog the memory of another, and of course it's 6 guys. We're not always didn't hold hands constantly. Sometimes we went different ways.
So I've got to ask the obvious question then. If Danny wasn't a musical collaborator, obviously maybe the lyrics and the vocals were his, but, you know, the rest of you were there for the formation of the music from those 2 wonderful albums. Could you ever see is there a possibility, I should say, that you'd all get back together again and recreate some of that?
What, as Cradle of Filth?
No, as a new band, but basically with the same members that appeared on Cruelty.
I don't know. People have made noises about it, but they are just noises. I wouldn't say never, but it's not super likely. What frustrates me is I do actually have all my demos for the album after Cruelty that never happened, where every time I re-rigged my studio, because I'm a sound engineer as well, I re-rigged my studio earlier this year, and there's a little folder, and you just think, bastards, should have finished them off. And so I wouldn't say never, but it's not the most likely thing, where unless it was relevant and new and those songs could come to life properly, I'm happy for them to sit in that folder. I really am.
Yep. Well, I think a lot of fans out there, myself included, maybe if things change in the next few years, mate, gosh, we'd love to see you all back together and putting together some kind of a project that contains that wonderful spirit that those 2 albums, and 3 recordings. I should include the From the Cradle to Enslave EP. So can we talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
That came out with an accompanying video, which I duly purchased. That was probably the band's first attempt at some significant visuals. What do you recall about both the EP and the video?
The video is one to talk about. There was supposed to be a video for Funeral in Carpathia from Dusk, and I will probably never know why the wheels came off it. It actually was starting to look kind of cool. I know there are some stills that escaped from this because a magazine they turned up on the day and published some stuff, and it all looked like it was going to look cool, like a mini horror movie was what we always talked about. And so yeah, that eventually, and it was really expensive, the process of making that video. It all happened. None of us were used to hanging around the studio and sitting on our hands all day, waiting to be called up to do whatever it was. But I did see the video a long time ago, and to some extent, it's what it should have been the whole time. I will never really understand why we didn't get a video for Funeral in Carpathia. Go and look online. There are some stills from it. There's an epic shot of Barker in full Gothic garb that I'd love to see again, because it was still that teamwork thing, everybody throwing in.
Yep.
And I forget the guy's name. He had made a lot of effort dressing sets and making it look, because we just kept saying Hammer films, not even Amicus or Tygon, Hammer, the way Hammer looked. That's what we wanted. And maybe there are some outtakes somewhere, but there wasn't. I'm sure you've noticed a lot of people ask me, are there unreleased songs from this and other unreleased? There aren't, because Dan always refused to do demos. This is the frustrating thing that I had with him. His contribution, of course, is vital. Even if you don't like his vocal, without that rhythmic thing that he does, that was his contribution, was the rhythms he would generate, not necessarily the textures. There was never any looping. So all the songs came over to me, bar one, as a vocal planted on top of a band. I wanted there to be more interaction and going round like that until the thing was everything it could be. And so, there was no wastage back then, but there should have been.
So was the purpose behind the From the Cradle to Enslaved EP, was it a record company commitment that you had to release an EP at that particular time?
Absolutely not. They really didn't want an EP. But it was the video thing, where I would have been more comfortable keeping going on the album. And for one reason or another, that's when I started to not be able to get along with Dan. And, as things changed without Nick, it was kind of vital that me and Dan got along, because otherwise the wheels came off stuff. And, it was sad. It was sad because we went from having more ideas than we knew what to do with to... It's hard to do this without getting into it for you, Andy. People were sandbagging me.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
I'd bring an idea in, and I won't tell you which member of the band this was, But a piece of critique I received on one of those demos that I still got locked up on my computer was, it's good, but it's only cool because of the notes and the sounds that you've used. Then what the fuck else are you looking for?
Yeah, I was going to say.
And it never occurred to me that people were sandbagging to try and, if you want to put an idea together, put the damn idea together. Because let's talk about the song Cradle to Enslave. That is made from sections that Rob and I wrote. There's an excellent thrash metal riff where I think we probably did that one together. The first riff is something that I put together. And it was that bashing back and forwards. You don't lose friends over this stuff. You just keep arguing your case and keep playing, because the edges will come off eventually. It'll become a natural thing that you all play. And that was I think it's a really good song, that one, actually.
I agree, and that's why I felt Midian was such a disappointment. And I understand Midian was actually quite a commercially successful album, but I'll go there and I'll say that I think that was more to do with the momentum that had been built off the previous 2 and a half releases, if you include the EP. What do you think happened? I mean, it was a massive change from the two original songs that appeared on From the Cradle to Enslave to what ended up being on Midian. Is that a case of where, I'm only asking for your hypothetical here, and if you don't want to answer it, so be it, but do you think it was a case of Paul Allender coming into the band with riffs that he had accumulated since the time that he left Cradle in 1994 or whenever it was, and they just, because it was almost like a 90-degree turn, wasn't it? The stylistic change from Cruelty and From the Cradle to Midian.
It's a hard one to answer because it's nothing to do with me. And genuinely, I only ever heard the last 2 minutes of whatever the single was that I heard on that radio show years ago.
Her Ghost in the Fog, I think that probably would have been, that track.
Yeah, I mean, I have a writing credit on that, but I'm damned if I can remember which part I wrote. None of those songs were anything to do with me. And like I say, I write all the time, and so probably there is something that I took part in that ended up in that song, because we get statements from the publishing company. And I was surprised to find a couple of years later that song started turning up with my name on it. But I don't know. I had a definite vision, which was not incompatible with everybody else, just for the record, of how the next album should be. Because we'd had all this chance, all this opportunity. What I didn't want was to waste it and produce an album that was less than what went before. And I was okay with doing the EP, but I would have preferred it if it was a single. I was totally up for doing that Misfits cover. That's one of my favourite guitar solos. I'm sure you guys don't appreciate it.
Oh, no, I understand. Dead But Dreaming, I think the song was, wasn't it?
Death Comes Ripping, it was called.
Death Comes Ripping. There you go.
Yeah. Yep. And the guitar solo on that, I was fully warmed up, and it was the last thing I did. And that's the one record, actually, where I didn't use my Jackson. That is the BC Rich and Flying V as well that I had at the time. But the reason I mention it is the guitar solo on Death Comes Ripping. I didn't want it to be like a twiddly metal thing. I wanted it to be brutal and noisy. And so I gave a couple of goes, wasn't happening. The engineers got on with something else. I gave the Flying V to the tape op who played a bit of guitar. I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go upstairs. This is quite late at night. And there was a bar, and I'm going to start doing shots. And when you guys are ready, you call me, but you play that guitar till it's so out of tune, it's painful. And I went in, I could barely remember doing it, couldn't really stand up straight, took one take at it, and that's the solo that's on the record.
Tell us about...
So, it was fun.
Well, that's a good story to compliment it, actually. Yeah, there you go.
Sometimes you can pay too much attention to what you're doing. Most musicians I know, we focus so far in eventually that you need to be able to take a step back. And we were in a position where we had the excellent Mike Exeter and Dan Sprigg working with us. And I would trust them to make those decisions. If they said, the drunken guitar solo, not happening, that's fine. And I can remember their faces. It was somewhere between horror and hilarity. And so it must have been the right thing to do.
Yeah. And look, I tell you, I really still enjoy your Anathema cover, Sleepless. That was...
that came out really well, didn't it?
Beautifully. Yeah, beautifully. To be honest, I think it's better than the original. Sorry, Anathema, but yeah, that's
why we tackled it. It's a great song. But of course, Anathema, and this is not a criticism of Anathema, they were very young when they did that. If they did Sleepless now, it would be a totally different beast. And I think that's what... It was a song that we all knew. It was something we all had in common, is that we liked the West Yorkshire bands, Paradise Lost, Anathema, My Dying Bride. That they were things that we all listened to. And I can't even recall how that one came up. It just happened. And because it's a relatively simple song, it started out as a knockabout cover. But what Les did with that fantastic synth sound at the beginning, that's possibly his best work on any of the Cradle of Filth stuff.
Agreed, yes. Yep.
Yeah, that was good fun. I forgot about that tune, actually.
Well,
there's
the irony for
two
Les
original
is
songs and a couple of covers, isn't there?
Yeah, there's definitely 2 original songs. There's 2 covers. There's a remix, and then there's a live version of "Funeral in Carpathia," which, to be honest, couldn't make much sense of that version that's on there. I didn't understand why that was included. So I will ask you that if you remember, or do you remember the decision making behind including this? I think it was called "Be Quick" or "Be Dead" version of "Funeral in Carpathia." It just sounds like a demo quality version of the song.
I think that might again be the aborted live recording.
Right.
I was gone by then. By the time that was all compiled, what you've got there is that one where there's a big cut where the whole band come out and there's just a vocal for a short while at the beginning.
I can't recall. I haven't listened to that. I to be honest, I got to Sleepless and generally switched it off.
Yeah, because Dan wouldn't take part in making demos, and I would have accepted some rhythmic noise with nonsense lyrics because they weren't for anybody else to hear. It's just so that we could work in a different frame. Or maybe it's just how he's made up. He's always going backwards, and I like to go forwards. And so he wanted to rejig some part of Funeral in Carpathia. And I remember at the beginning, I said, well, look, if there's nothing to track, it's just Funeral in Carpathia. I'm not that interested. I'm going to focus on the new stuff. So, wrong person to ask. You'd need to ask Dan about that, realistically, because that was done in the studio where we rehearsed, it was an okay place. But, I recall it came up, and there was this idea, which I think, if it happened, I regard it as the one brilliant idea Dan had that we never, ever capitalized on, was, that takes down a whole alleyway. Well, it's to do with how I wanted the next record to be. And I didn't want him to waste it on a redo of a song that you guys already knew and you had fuck knows how many different versions of in different places.
Yep.
So, that was a sad waste of an idea if it's the one I'm thinking of. Because, I argued for let's not do that. Let's do something else. Because at the time, so much time was being wasted in disputes for no reason at all that nothing was getting written.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a great band at the time. We had Adrian playing drums, who is very different to Nick, but he's still an excellent drummer.
He's the drummer from At the Gates, isn't he?
He's much more the drummer, the pounding metal drummer than Nick. Nick's really musical, despite how over the top that guy always goes.
Yep.
I still talk to Nick. He's a good guy. But, me and Nick were mates, I think. Me and Les and Nick used to hang out. And one of the things me and Nick had in common, first time I met him, first time I went up to play with that band, was in his normal organised style, he told me what street he lived on, but not what number. And this is before normal folk had mobile phones.
And
so I parked my car, walked along, and I could hear chalice of blood coming out of this house on this terrace. That's got to be his house. And we bonded over our love of, not necessarily the best or brightest thrash and new wave of British heavy metal that was going on back then. Because we were born within months of each other, me and Nick. So we were in a parallel, I guess. It was a thrill to meet somebody else who knew some of these weird old thrash metal songs that we used to knock about.
Talk about old thrash metal songs. I think you recorded I think it was the song by Death or Massacre, Dawn of Eternity. Were you on that track?
No, I think the only thrash cover that we did was a Sodom tune called Sodomy and Lust.
Yes, I've got that. Yeah, I've got that. You did a fantastic version of Hallowed Be Thy Name, which almost improves on the original unbelievably, and I'm a massive Iron Maiden fan.
That's like metal heresy, mate. It is a good version, but that is very high praise, Andy.
I've got to hand it to you, and it's your guitar line, the main guitar lead in that one there. There's just a bit of extra spice in that one there. You're a right-handed guitarist, I take it, so you're riffing with your...
I'm left-handed, I play right-handed.
There you go, maybe
it's
that's
a perk of the Catholic education, not allowed to write with your left hand at Catholic school. And so I didn't know I was left-handed until somebody pointed out I operate all my pedals with my left foot because the nuns didn't give a shit what I did with my feet. They just were obsessed with me not writing with my left hand.
Oh, gotcha. Well, we share that. I'm Catholic as well. I went to a Catholic school up until 4th or 5th grade, and my father's Protestant, so I ended up going to a Protestant school from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a bit more liberal, smaller liberal here in Australia about that stuff. We didn't get some of that old school Orthodox attitude toward learning and using left and right hand. It's so crazy where that comes from, isn't it? The left hand path being the devil's path, and if you use your left hand, you must be nefarious. Especially you would have only been at school through the late 80s, I take it, wouldn't you?
I left the Catholic school in 1982 because, same as yourself, actually, my father was of no religion. And so I think I probably asked, because the kids in the town where I grew up, they all went to the regular state school, not the Catholic school. And I wanted to hang out with my mates at school. And that was, I was given the choice when I was quite young, so about 6 or 7. But it's also a crucial part of my growing up, the Catholic schooling. Some of those nuns were family friends and stayed with me throughout my life. They're some of the wisest and kindest people I've ever met. There's Sister Mary Immaculate. There you go, blow your mind, something from Cradle of Filth, praising nuns. She lived to be a very old lady until the day she died. She was always there you could ask her about anything. She spent her life reading. And she used to read to me when I was very young stories from Greek mythology, and we had this fabulous, thick Larousse dictionary of mythology. And she would sit there and read me these stories. But she was so switched on, she would say, well, this story happens in Assyrian and Persian, and talk me through it. And so I knew the story of Marduk when I was 8 years old.
Well, there you
So
go,
that's
mate.
probably how I became a fan, is I spotted a band called Marduk, who, of course, is a hero. He's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
It was a great part of my life. It really was. But yeah, the left-handed thing is kind of irrelevant. As a guitar player yourself, if you're left-handed and you play left-handed, you pay 20% more for your guitars and you got 40% less choice. Kind of worked out.
Indeed, yeah. But just talking about...
So I'm talking you off track there. Sorry.
Not at all, mate.
Back on track, please.
We talk about anything you want to talk about. It's just a wonderful privilege and an honour to be able to talk to you. I have been wondering for a long time what you've been up to. So any information you want to share, as far as I'm concerned, is premium information, mate. So I'll just digress for a moment. I've been a black metal fan and a metal fan for a long time. I'm 39, so I got into it very young. And in Australia, we really didn't hear much about the church burnings and some of the more, let's call it criminal activities that were taking place in Scandinavia at the time. But when I got wind of what was going on in the band's mayhem and some of the band members in Emperor, I just thought it was childish, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of people felt the same way. I
think what you're talking about is messed up teenagers that do that kind of thing.
Yeah, isolated
all over
teenagers,
the world.
socially.
The tragedy of Varg and Euronymous.
Yeah.
If you could see a statistic of how many teenagers fight over money and somebody gets hurt or killed around the world, it would be colossal. It's one of those tragedies that exists. I never met either of the guys. I don't think I would have been friends with either of them. Childish, possibly, but the Scandinavian attitude, it wasn't as liberal as it is in Britain. Growing up, even with my mother in the church, I was hyper aware of the pagan imagery that went with the Christian church in Britain, where the Reformation vaguely happened around here. But even in the church that I used to attend as a kid with my mum, there were little icons that had survived the... Do you know what the Reformation is?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, the destruction of the churches. I'm from a fairly remote part of Britain, and so there were like Sheila McGee and dragon images in the church, as well as all your regular Christian iconography. And so I have a different take on it. Especially the part of the world I'm from, we have like local saints that were there because they were the small gods of the well or the sea or whatever. And they planted a church there and said, well, actually, they're Saint Necton. They're not just Necton anymore. Who's one of our local small gods, I guess. So I'm not a vandal. I never had that need to rebel the same way as the Norwegian guys, so I can't judge them. But it's tragic that is the core of what people know, because there was some great music as well. I loved the early Mayhem stuff. The Mysterious Dom Satana is definitive.
It's a brilliant
for me.
album. Yeah, no, I've reviewed the live record last year, and the live version of it. Mysterious Dom Satana's Alive, I think it's called. And that's brilliant. But the personnel are very different on that particular recording, and the mayhem that's going around in 2017. Hellhammer, of course, or I can't remember his real name. Jorn Axel Blomberg, I think his name is. Very good drummer, probably one of my favourite black metal drummers ever, and I do pay a lot of attention to the drummers, as is Nick, by the way. I've always really enjoyed Nick's drumming and did follow him over to his projects in Lockup, and he's currently touring, and I think he's going to be in Australia pretty soon with Bruchera.
I believe so. He's actually we spoke the other day, he's in Mexico with Ancient at the moment.
God, they're still going? I used to love them.
Yeah, that's what I said to him.
That surprises me.
He's out there and playing drums, and he's still a great player. He really is. And I would welcome an opportunity to play with Nick again. We haven't played together when did he go, 98? And no matter how many times we used to argue, we're still friends. We're veterans of something, me and Nick, going against the grain as hard as we did. You have to come out of it still friends, I guess.
So you guys toured the US on the back of Cruelty and the Beast. Now, I remember that because I was a subscriber to Metal Maniacs magazine, the American publication, and reading about your exploits there sounded like, conquistadors going to the New World, so to speak. What do you recall about that tour? And I take it you and Nick had a blast.
Yeah, absolutely we did. We had great fun. The tour I think tour is probably too strong. We never did the knockdown, drag out 4 to 5 months of US touring. We were always sent to like key cities, and I did 2 nights in Mexico City, which was and that was before we hit America. Actually, it was a great. Now you mention it, Andy, that was a fucking cool time. It really was. Went to Mexico City, which if you've ever visited is a mind blowing place in the first place. I live in a town of 18,000 people, and that's the biggest city on earth. So it was like going into space for me. And the shows there were legendary. We had a day off in between our 2 shows in the same venue. I saw Bauhaus the next day, and I spent the day hanging out at Teotihuacan. They arranged for us to go up into the pyramids and visit. And so it was a great time. Then we hit San Francisco. I can remember getting into San Francisco. That was an awesome show, a place called Mariners Hall. And we went into our own backstage and going, fuck off, that's full of thrash metal legends that we grew up listening to. So there's dudes from Testament and Exodus who we'd met when they were touring Europe. There's Gary Holt, awesome guy, can't say enough nice things about him.
Sure.
And Bailoff, who's no longer with us, of course.
Well, Eric Peterson was a big fan of your band, or Cradle of Filth, back in the day.
He and Chuck were there. They were really cool guys. It was the first time I met them. But of course, you see the same faces at festivals, and we weren't great mates, but they were good guys. They were really kind to us, all of those. And I suppose it's because you couldn't interview me and Nick without us rattling off our favourite thrash metal bands back then. But we also met Jeff from Possessed, who was in the audience. If we'd known Jeff from Possessed was coming, come in the green room, have as much beer as you want, Jeff. You are a legend. That noise, and he did produce that sound for me when I realised who it was.
Yeah.
There's a guy who worked for a different record label than we were on. I think he was associated with a support band. So do you see the dude over there? That's Jeff Becker. Well, then I simply have to go and thank him for the work he did, because 7 churches, that's DNA for me.
Yeah, likewise.
I used to pound that on my Walkman when I was a kid. It's an amazing record. And I'm thrilled that he's back out being in Possessed again.
Well, they've got a new album coming out. He signed a Nuclear Blast, actually, not with the same members, of course, Jeff and Larry Lalonde from Primus. He's not in the band, and Mike Suss, they're not in the band, but he's got a new membership around him. But if you look at the live clips on YouTube of the band, mate, they sound hot. Yeah.
I saw a little bit of footage of the Exorcist. And it's that album, and Under the Sign of the Black Mark, I can remember buying, and I forget which sequence it was, which one I had first, because I would have been 12, I guess, when I was just into buying records. And those 2 records just changed how I viewed metal from that point on. There was nothing so dark and terrifying as Under the Sign of the Black Mark. There was nothing so brutal as 7 Churches. And so that was my step off from being an Iron Maiden kid and being into the new wave stuff, which, of course, if you're my age, had gone out of fashion. They were just, Venom albums were floating around in bargain bins. And that was how I got a lot of my collection together.
I remember that.
And
I do remember that because I had a good chat to both Jeff Dunn, aka Mantis, and Tony Bray, aka Abaddon, and of course, when I say new frontman, the frontman that was in the band post.
It's Tony again, isn't it?
Yeah, Tony Dolan, awesome bloke. I spoke to him for almost 2 hours actually, not that long ago. So I'm a massive Venom fan, but I'm almost on my own with this. I much prefer Tony than Kronos or Conrad.
You can make a case for either. I think the Primeval album,
yes,
apart from the Black Sabbath cover, is an incredibly strong record. They didn't need to do a cover tune on there.
No.
Because I remember that as a brand new album. It got booted to fuck in its reviews.
Really?
I was a Venom fan. Of course I'm going to, really. Yeah. Venom were a joke at one point. They had their spot and they were treated like a cartoon in the British press. But you can't see a copy of Welcome to Hell when you're 12 and go, it's got to be worth one listen, hasn't it?
Oh, that's what I did. I remember buying it on vinyl or black metal actually with the goat on the front and thinking, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get kicked out of home when I take this home, because it's a bit like exactly what you're saying. You could buy the Venom albums in bargain bins. But I very quickly got into it, and the album that I liked the best by far actually was Primeval, particularly the fact that you could hear...
Well, they went forward, didn't they? Possessed. Yeah. Is it Possessed and Calm Before the Storm, Come Before That? They've got good spots on them, but they weren't strong albums. And I think it was a strong album in the same way some bands do, like Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath. I think that's one of their strongest records, even though you're supposed to just say, the Aussie stuff reigns.
Let's talk about that quickly. I maintain, and I tell you what, I haven't published a lot of it, but I get a lot of people agreeing with me on this. I much prefer Black Sabbath with Dio fronting them, and I much prefer Ozzy by himself as a solo artist with Bob Daisley writing the tunes. I always have.
Well, Bob Daisley, what bass player?
Oh, he's a Sydney lad. He's like me. He's from Australia, and
good stuff.
He lives in Australia. He's back in Australia, or I think he's been back.
What is that riff? There is one unutterably cool bass line. It's the beginning of a tune called, is it Believer?
Believe dun 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 dun.
Now in the 21st century, you don't hear bass playing like that. Precise on the drums, massive grooves, so heavy it's untrue, and then the guitar riff is just magnificent. I'm not a huge fan of Ozzy solo stuff, actually. I know guitar players are supposed to go giddy over Jake and Randy Rhoads playing, but I was always more into the Black Sabbath thing. I love Ozzy era Sabbath. Volume 4 is one of my all-time favourite records. But fair's fair. Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules has my...
Oh, Mob Rules.
Probably. Yeah.
Under the Sign of the Southern Cross. Right there.
Yeah. Find me a heavier riff.
Well...
that is exceptional. And I love Dehumanizer as well. I got to see the Dehumanizer tour.
Yeah.
And it's one of the heaviest things I've ever seen. That computer god, what a drummer. He's amazing.
Well, God, you're reading my mind here. About a year ago or so, I got to quiz Vinny Appice for about half an hour just on Dehumanizer. And it was a bit like the discussion I'm having with yourself, where I'm able to go into the nuances, computer god, TV crimes, asking, how did you guys do this? And, he gave me a lot of copy on it. It made for a very good interview. But yeah, I'd say Dehumanizer would be very close to being in my top 10 albums ever.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere up there for me as well. That was just one-off stunning record. The Heaven and Hell album I always think of as a Black Sabbath record. I saw that tour as well. And nobody shouted Heaven and Hell when they wanted an encore. But, there's a tune on there that was the equal of anything they did on Heaven and Hell or Mob Rules or Dehumanizer, called Follow the Tears.
Yes.
I am a massive Dio fan. I will give any Dio record one listen, because I was into Rainbow when I was a kid, and so that magnificent voice just travelled through my life with me.
Yes, yeah, I know. I
got to meet him a couple of times. He's a really, really, really superb man.
Is that right? How did you meet him in a like as a musician or as a fan?
Both. When Dio played, I think it was in Bristol, which is a couple of hours from here, with Trouble supporting them. That was some night out when you were a teenager. I hung out because I was able to, and one of the crew came out, and it was a horrible night. And he said, if you just come in, Ronnie's going to come out and say hello to you all. And I was taken aback by what a nice guy he was and how much time he had for everybody that was standing there dripping with the rain we'd just been out in. And then many years later, I was introduced to him at a signing he was doing, but as his peer, which still seems strange. And he was every bit as excellent. And I got his autograph, still have it on my studio wall.
Nice.
It's one of the best souvenirs I've got. That one of my Manowar autographs, because I never thought I'd meet Manowar.
Manowar. Well, famously, they're like Russian that they've never toured Australia, which is quite bizarre because they do have quite a fan base down here. But what's your favourite Manowar album?
Hail to England or Kings of Metal. Oh, you could put a Rizzler between them, mate. I love them both for different reasons. And I love Manowar more after I met them because they absolutely mean it. There's not a whiff of irony about that
That's
band.
what I've heard. They're deadly serious, yeah.
I'll tell you, they were in a cabin next to us at a festival. We were special guests to them in a Spanish festival. And I thought, well, this is my chance. I'm going to go and bang on the door and sail out of Manowar. And Eric Adams opened the door and apologised, said he's really busy. But behind him, Joe DeMaio was, he had like a little headphone practice set up on and was doing the craziest bass solo to nobody. I thought, shit, they are for real. I love them even more.
I remember about the same time I bought Dusk and Her Embrace, I purchased Louder Than Hell, which was my first Manowar album, and they've got a video to the song Return of the Warlord. Have you seen that video?
I don't think I've seen the video. I know the tune.
But apparently in the video they get arrested by the police and it's all legit. None of it's – they get legit for making too much noise. They get arrested for making too much noise and for blocking off a street or something. So, yeah, you're right. I've heard third hand that they are deadly serious. There's not a hint of irony about what they do and they're deadly serious about living what they represent both in the albums and in their videos and on the live shows.
Yeah. Oh, one day I hope you get to see that band because they are exactly what you hope for when you see Manowar live. And it's just the sense of fun and community. There's no other metal band really has that apart from Maiden, where whatever, you go to a metal festival, whatever, everybody likes Manowar, everybody likes Maiden, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And yeah, they're fantastic nights. I remember that Spanish show, I literally ran through a shower and went up on a gantry and watched it from above the stage and then realised the place to be is in front of the stage and just went and enjoyed a Manowar show. It's fantastic.
Cool, mate.
Because I saw him when I was about 14 and then I was probably 24 by the time I saw him again.
Yeah, okay. So, mate, I'll just do a time check. We've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes now. I've still got a few more questions to ask you, but just in a courtesy to you, mate, how are we for time?
There's no rush. You can. I'm sure you appreciate, Andy. Nobody's ever asked me these things before, so you can have as much time as you want. All I've got to do today is wait. My studio has neighbours, and I need to make some noise later on, and so I'm just kicking up. I will talk as long as you're able. Okay.
Here's a question for you then. How were you recruited into Cradle?
My friends saw an ad in Kerrang. Wanted black metal band, avant-garde black metal band, want guitarist. He said, that's you, that is. And so I sent a cassette. He helped me program up some drums and put a couple of ideas together. And I played with them a couple of times. And what was crucial to me was that I was able to write in that band. And that's why I stayed. Yeah, playing with Barker was good enough. But if I was there just to play somebody else's riffs, that wouldn't have entertained me.
So was it an audition like he learned these 3 songs, come in, play them and see if it gels? Or did you guys go down to the pub and just see if it was going to meld before you went into the rehearsal studio?
In theory, I went up there to play some songs. What actually happened is we went to the pub.
Well, that's how you do it, isn't it? With all due respect, I've just joined a new band myself, and these days you don't go to the pub when you're older and sophisticated. You go and get a bloody coffee and have some lunch, and that's what we did. But I've got videos of myself playing bass, and although I'm thoroughly into metal, as you can tell, I've never played in a metal band outside of a new metal band, and I play funk and jazz.
Wow!
But yeah, that's what you do these days. You tend to sort of see if it's going to work out personally and then get into the rehearsal studio. So it doesn't surprise me that that's how it worked out for you. But you obviously found that you all got along quite well.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I stayed over with Nick and I stayed over with Rob and we all got on. And Dan as well. You know, whatever has been said over the years. We were good friends, me and Dan. I used to room with him. And, you know, they were interesting guys. Where, you know, me and Nick bonded over the thrash metal thing. My interest in magic meant I had something immediately to talk about with Dan. Rob is, like I said, a strange character. That's not a criticism. It's just, I said the same thing to Nick. Did you actually know him? And everybody kind of goes, no, we just played with him. He was a funny guy, like I say. We didn't know much about him. And we got along. Where at the time, there's a dude called Brian playing the other guitar from a death metal band from Florida. You're probably more clued up on this. Who was so flaky it was untrue. That's how I ended up I don't know if you know, I did a tour as the only guitarist in Cradle of Filth. It's the only time they went out with a single guitar.
As a
that was hard
five-piece.
work, mate.
Yeah, I bet it was.
Yeah.
Jesus, yeah.
It was busy, let me tell you that. But I think in a strange way, the Flaky guy came back for the big show in London, but I got to do all the provincial shows where nobody knew who we were. So
what year was that?
Was footage of that?
Is that about 94 or thereabouts?
I think that's 95, Christmas 95, because we were in a studio and I think we did part of a British tour, stopped, went to the studio. I might be wrong, check with the other guys, and then came back out again to do this one show in London a few days later, whereupon we magically had another guitar player and then he disappeared again. If you look up his name and Google him, you can see why he was never going to be a stayer.
Yeah, okay.
He's a good guitar player,
yep.
but substance abuse issues. You know, the town I lived in, well, the poor guy's dead now. An overdose killed him. So, I have a distinct opinion on dealing with heroin addicts on a day-to-day basis because my peers, guys I knew from school, went that way. You know, you're all free to choose, but you know, that's one of the choices that is kind of permanent when you make it. And it's made it difficult to get along with, I wish I could remember his name. Nick would tell you, Brian, because he was great mates with Nick is how he was there.
How he got recruited. Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah, and so I can tell you the songs I had to learn from the first album. No, that's not true. I think I had to learn 2 songs from the first album and maybe Funeral in Carpathia, because that was considered a really high technical challenge, which it sort of is to play, I guess.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can certainly imagine that it would be. Yeah, but
I learned the title track from the first record, a song called "To Eve, the Art of Witchcraft" that stayed in the live set for years.
Yes,
and I think probably the second time I went up, I was given a cassette of the Dusk demos that got released, and I think I played Funeral in Carpathia. But it was all a bit of a rush in the end. I had a lot to learn, and there was writing going on for the Vampire EP. Which I just jumped straight into. You know, the first track on that took 20 minutes to write. That was just me and Nick doing one.
Yep.
The only other input was somebody said, needs an epic ending. Epic ending, go! And we just did it. We got along like that. Yep. We didn't think that hard. It's people are able to scrutinize their music in a different way now. Back then it was, what's happening in the room? That's good. Move forward. So it was one of those things. My friend Paul, he spotted this thing and just said, that's totally you, that is.
So was it one of those things where you met the guys and went, you know, within the first sort of 15 minutes, this is going to work out, or was it a bit of a longer process? I went up and played on a kind of putting your toe in the water basis, maybe 2 or 3 times, and then I came home and earned some money, and because it's the other side of the country I had to move to, and sorted out a way of getting up there and living. And I think I officially joined September 95, but I played with them from about May, I think. Okay, so you were brought in as a session player just to get through a few... No, I was never a session player. I didn't do any public work with them during those times leading up to that. Okay, so when you say May, that's the May of 1996 from when you joined in 1995? May 95 was when I first went up, I think. Okay, gotcha, yep. Yeah, and so, they didn't have a live set together. I will never really know what happened with the Ryan brothers, in all honesty, but they were a fucking disaster area when I got there. That band was broken, and it required everybody to pull to make it into what it became. And we did, because we didn't have any choice. We didn't have any money. There was no budget to make that record. And I won't give you the numbers, but it's something like an 80%, 180% lift on what we had to do the demos for Dusk initially against what we had to complete Vampire. So nobody was getting rich. I was just playing it because I like playing metal and they were good guys to play. I'd been up in London and played in a few bands up there. And I was always aware that I can stay in my hometown and play and have fun. If I want to do something productive, I need to leave. It's a small community down here even now. Yep. So, and I suppose if you're Australian, you get an even better idea of what remote will give you in the choice of musicians in your local area. Oh God, there's even as I was growing up in Sydney, it was through that era. You can probably appreciate. I did try to join and form mini metal bands for about a 5-year period, but you could never get a collective together. And then, of course, by the late 90s, that bloody Limp Bizkit thing hit. And, of course, a lot of the guys playing death metal and genuine heavy metal switched to that because that was their ticket. They'd been playing metal for years, and I don't blame them. And I don't even have anything against the new metal style of music. Even I ended up playing it. but it was really the only sort of metal that you could play if you wanted to play live in Australia. There were very few and far places, very few places. I mean, we had some significant metal bands that didn't so much have a global impact, but they were influential in the underground, like Mortal Sin and Slaughterlord and the like.
Yeah, I remember that Mortal Sin and Slaughterlord. I Am Immortal, that was a great tune from Mortal Sin.
Yeah. Well,
and Hobbs, Angel of Death, and who else was Australian that was cool? Used to have an album by a band called Oz that was interesting, if not a great album.
Oz, okay, yeah, I'll check them out. Yeah, I wasn't.
That was early 80s. That was one of my bargain bin finds. Had a big burning skull on the front. It looked like my sort of thing for £1.
Yeah, no, I remember the album cover actually, but it's probably the first time in about 15 or 20 years my memory's been jogged that it was a release of that type. But look, even back then, I don't know whether you recall a lot of the bands that supported you when you played in Sydney in 1997, but with the greatest of respect to those bands, the quality wasn't that good either, even of the ones that were playing. They were basically, you had your Malevolent Creation. For some reason, Malevolent Creation was a big band in Australia. Never understood that. Yeah. I thought it would have been Cannibal Corpse or Morbid Angel, but Malevolent did have a lot of followers, particularly a lot of guitarists that I spoke to, fellow guitarists that I spoke to, play like Rob Barrett, because at that time he was in Malevolent. It'd gone from Cannibal Corpse into Malevolent Creation. It was like, oh, not really. Can we do something more like Cradle or Satyricon? Yeah. something.
I don't recall which bands played in Sydney, in all honesty, because it was a strange night, as you know. Everything was going sideways from the second we turned up at the venue. But I believe in Melbourne we played with a band called Abramelin, who they were serviceable, but one of the things we had was a very thick skin and balls of steel, and we went off and did our own thing. And that's the key with metal. That's what stops it going stale. Heavy metal is self-referential by definition. We're all fans. That's why we do it. There's nobody who'll be dumb enough to say, do you know what will get me rich? I'm going to form a heavy metal band. You do it because you love it. So
true, though.
I think a lot of the bands that I encountered, not just in Australia, but a lot of the support bands we saw, they were like something else. They were doing it because it was a kind of calligraphy. They weren't building on, I nearly told you the name of the band, then it's not about naming names, a band that sounded remarkably like Morbid Angel. They weren't building on the bricks that Morbid Angel put down. They were just desperate to sound like Morbid Angel.
Yes, yeah.
I was chatting to an old mate of mine the other day about a well-known British black metal band who are current today. And he was saying they pissed away 3 days in a studio doing a cover version, trying to get the drum fills exactly like they were on the original version.
God, yeah. Okay.
Well, that's self-defeating. It's totally self-defeating. Do your own thing. The great thing about covers is, I think, play a song that everybody knows. Don't go and look it up on Guitar Pro. Just play it how you recall it. And it'll be so different. It's your own version, but by the time the whole band can hack it together. So, I know what you're saying. They were really nice guys that I met in all those bands. Because that venue in Sydney, that was the weird one on the beach, wasn't it?
Spot on. Look, that was at Coogee. It was a gig called, very famous venue, actually. There's been a hell of a lot of bands that have played there. If memory served me correct, it wouldn't have been a couple of months before that. I'm a big, as I've already mentioned, I'm a jazz and funk guy at heart. I watched Fishbone. So the gig prior to watching you guys, I can't recall how the chronological order of it, but it was Fishbone and then Cradle of Filth. So it used to host all sorts of bands, and I'd say that the promoter was a young guy. I don't know his name, and I only ever met him once when I went into, and I think I've got this right, Sanity was the name of a record store in the Fox Studios that had been built in the Sydney Football Stadium precinct, and he was running that Sanity. And I remember just meeting him, and he told me that he put it on that night, and he told me about all the problems that he encountered just getting the people at the venue to get along with the bands, and also the punters. Now, I was only very young at the time. I was only about 18 at the time, so I wasn't drinking because I was driving. But I remember being very bored and going to the kebab shop and sitting down for about an hour and a half or so before you guys went on, just waiting. And I think there was a bit of a call amongst the fans that were waiting outside of the venue, both on the beach and in the adjacent fast food joints, to sort of put the word out that Cradle were about to go on stage. And with the greatest of respect to the bands that were playing before, I think we were just done after about the 7th or 8th band.
Yeah. Now that I've recalled the venue, I remember it much, much better. Because I remember there was nothing for us to do. There just wasn't any progress. So there were a few people hanging around by what was serving as backstage that day. And me and Nick just went out and took him some cans of beer and had a chat to whoever was there to talk to. It was a strange day. But what I really remember is it's another little piece of the puzzle of why I had such a good time in Australia. During soundcheck, I could not put my finger on what that place reminded me of. And it was years later I realised it looks exactly like the coastline where I'm from. We were playing out to the ocean in that big shallow bay. Looks, even the scale of it is really similar to somewhere where I used to spend a lot of time when I was a teenager. So, I remember it much better. But we came across far worse promoters. He would never be the outstanding bad promoter that had shit going wrong constantly. I think that was lack of experience and ill luck for that guy, where there were plenty of people that you recall, we are never playing for this guy again.
Yeah, I remember talking to him. Oh, he might have worked in Utopia.
Was there a record store called Utopia? That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, Utopia.
I think we did a signing in Utopia because I still have the T-shirt.
Nice.
I moved house a lot, and I would just that's like a souvenir to remind me of when I was in Australia. And so that was packed down in one of my guitar cases. And now that I've got somewhere fairly stable to live, I unpacked all my guitars, see what still works. And there it was, the Utopia shirt. So yeah, that was the place. I had to, the strangest thing I ever signed. This guy came to the counter where we were all sitting and stood there. And it was like Nick and then me. And he just stared at Nick and stared at me and then pulled his fake leg off and planted it on the counter. Because everybody else had an LP or a CD in their hands they wanted signing. Fair enough, mate. If that's what you want to happen, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, actually, I didn't know that you guys did a signing then. God, I would have turned up to that if I'd realised that. I turned up many years later after you'd exited the band when they toured on the back of Midian and got some things signed then. But I do definitely remember the show. And when I was talking to Danny, I reminded him that he pulled out a couple of classic one-liners. Now, I'll really test your memory here. It was about a week or two, again, if memory serves me correct, after Michael Hutchence passed away. And from stage, Danny said, in that, that death metal voice, that black metal voice that he puts on when he's talking between songs, this song is dedicated to Michael Hutchence. And I remember myself and my mate looked at each other and said, shit, what are we going to hear here? Like a black metal version of an In Excess song or something. And then very quickly he said, and I'm glad that fucking cunt is dead.
Yeah. He was not a spontaneous man. It would have been one of those things that he put together during the day.
Oh, is that right?
So I don't recall that particular gag, but there were a few. There's a couple of ones that used to really grate on me because after 40 shows, I used to break a lot of strings. He would he would do the same gag. I can probably recall them. But it's like a chain of consequence. If I start to think, I'll tell you what, if I hear the theme to Omen 2, which is why I'll walk on music back then, I can actually recall how the set ran. Because it was very organised. It wasn't a spontaneous band because with 6 people, you can't really do that sort of thing.
No, yeah.
7 people live because we used to have a backing singer as well. And
Sarah on that trip too.
When he's on good form, Dan's a funny guy. He really was.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, he was very congenial to me, and you can probably appreciate that I asked him some pretty detailed questions about the band when you were in it, because I've already, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I'm a massive fan of those 3 releases that you were a part of. He took all of my questions in good humour. I actually thought he'd tell me to get stuffed occasionally, but when I got a bit too close to, I wasn't really talking a lot about the new release, which is called Cryptoriana. I only asked one question about that. Now, these sort of block interviews that I get, because I get them through good old John Howarth down there in Wollongong, we tend to only get sort of between 15 minutes and half an hour to ask questions. So you've really got to be on point. And, you get to talk to all sorts of very interesting and wonderful people through that, but you've really got to, get your questions sorted and ask some different questions in that environment. But with Danny, I just felt, look, I've been a long-time fan of the band, and I really wanted to get his perspective on some things. But look, I understand he's got an ongoing concern with the band. And when I asked him, would he ever see a possibility of getting back together with yourself and Les? Mate, he didn't say no. He didn't shut me down.
Well, he'd have to talk to me at some point. We haven't spoken for a long time. And I wouldn't be against it, but he was a fucking prick with me. But I understand there are other factors, and I'm not going to go into them with you because it's not very interesting.
No, I understand.
And it vilifies people, and there's no need to vilify those people. No, they know I think they're a cunt, and they will stay fucked off because of it. So, it turned out this guy didn't have as many mates as he thought, and they all decided to spill the beans to me. And that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so, I don't think it's his fault or my fault that we fell out ultimately. So, he's welcome to bring me up. I'm not that hard to find, mate.
Well, he was surprised.
It'd be interesting because I thought I saw him and I was going to go and speak to him, but it was just another little guy with similar hair at a show that I went to last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So,
he was surprised that I was interviewing you, actually. And, of course, I haven't read anything online either. And I thought, okay, I thought when I say read anything online, I haven't read any interviews with you online either. And I thought, oh, okay, does this mean it's unusual to get an interview with you? No, I think it obviously means that it's
not unusual, Andy. It's unique. Nobody has ever asked me these things.
I'm surprised, mate. I'm surprised because I know I'm not the only one who's I'm not the only person where your guitar playing has had the kind of impact that I've shared with you.
Well, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. That I always said that would be the ultimate compliment, to come up as an influence to somebody who's making progress with their music. Because I can list all my favorite guitar players and the impact they had on me and why and all that stuff. And to hear your own name coming up like that is the greatest compliment. Absolutely the greatest compliment. And the best way to repay it is for you guys to go and do something unique. Keep building on it. It blows my mind. It really does. I've actually had to discuss with some people that it doesn't matter what I've ever done. Talk to me like a human being. I'm not, especially when you speak to me on the phone. Over my life, I have learned that I am physically intimidating and I have to behave a certain way when I meet new people. I was 6'3" when I was in Australia. I didn't stop growing until I was 30.
Jesus, and, okay. What are you now?
Yeah, I'm a little over 6'4". I'm friggin' enormous. I will never be comfortable on public transport ever again.
Yes.
And, when people approach me through Facebook or whatever, it astonishes me the level of praise that people have for me. It's beautiful. That's the mission. It was never anything else. It was add my little bit to the book of how they play heavy metal guitar. And if I could manage that, wouldn't that be amazing? And years later, I find out there are guys like you that are bringing my name up in that context. I can't thank you enough. It's stunning.
Oh, it's well earned and it's deserved, and it is all about the music, mate. I mean, it's I just remember the impact that it had on me at the time because I had been into Maiden, but it just felt like in the late 90s, especially the mid to late 90s, there was just this void, and so the underground became not mainstream, but became more readily available. And you could go into regular record shops, not just the Utopias of the world down in Sydney or the Rocking Horses of Brisbane. That's another independent record store. You could actually go into the HMVs. Remember HMV and Virgin Records? And you could buy Cradle of Filth records.
Well, I think that's the luck of us being on a really good label. MFN were a brilliant label for us. Somebody reminded me of Music for Nations the other day. And essentially, they didn't give a fuck what we did as long as we did it and did a great job of it. And that less and less labels are supporting bands in that way. I do a few reviews for a couple of websites of metal records because essentially I talk about music all the time. I decided to start writing some of it down and I get to hear lots of new music. But the thing that I hear most is the terrible presentation of good music. And a lot of that, when you look at what I do is I listen to the record, then I read you get the same thing, the promo bump about what I'm supposed to feel about this album.
Yep.
And I read that later on, and you look at the label and go, oh, shit, somebody keep an eye on it, and somebody put some money into this band, and there's something really special going to happen there. And we were very lucky to have a label who, to some extent, I don't think they knew what we were doing, but they knew we were doing it, and they helped us, aided and abetted, probably in a legal sense.
Yes. Yep.
So, it's... And I know record companies don't have the money or the stroke that they used to, but it wouldn't be an impossible change where labels that were new in the 90s that I knew are now, excuse me.
Yeah, mate.
Hello. Speaking. Okay. After 4 o'clock today would suit it? Okay, mate. Well, give us a call on this number and there might be somebody here to let you in. Cheers, pal. Sorry, mate, you there?
No worries. Yeah, all good. No worries.
But yeah, it's, I hear lots of great new music that if it had the same sort of support or half the support we had, would truly achieve something incredible. I'm not naming names. There are lots of bands that I watch. Do you think they're going to do something magic? And some of them let me down because they go around in circles, but more it's to do with the presentation. Actually, not the LP cover, what people would say is production. The rendering of the music itself. I think we were lucky to have guys like Kit and Mike Exeter and Dan Sprigg to work with that would make it all happen for us. Because I'm sure you know, Mike Exeter actually played a lot of keyboards on Dusk and
no, I didn't know that.
A little bit on Cruelty.
Okay.
I say Greg, as a human being, is all right, but as a keyboard player, he just didn't. I don't think he'd ever been in a band where there was a back and forward about what was going to happen.
Right. Okay.
And he was like a rabbit in headlights. He was just freezing. And so Mike is an excellent keyboard player. He really helped him out on Dusk. You know, arranging and stuff like. Because some of the arrangements Mike did are stunning.
They are. They're beautiful.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
You know, and he works on super high-profile projects these days. He did work on the last Black Sabbath album and Dio projects and things like that. And he earned his place there. I believe he's now the Grammy Award-winning Mike Exeter.
I think you're right. Yeah, on that one there. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of hands-on, and it didn't bother him to do it. It bothered us that we had a keyboard player that couldn't. I think that's what pushed us towards Les in the end. Because you know, Les is a great guy. He's a really good player, and he's paying attention. He will go back and forward about ideas fast.
Well, he seems like a real talent. I know virtually nothing about him, only what I've read, but he's now doing, I mentioned it earlier, front of house for Paradise Lost. He was in Anathema for many years. I think he's their longest tenured keyboard player, if I'm not mistaken. And of course,
Anathema used to record near me, and so he would come up and visit now and then. And he's himself. He's one of those people. There is a definite sense of Les about him.
Yeah, well, look, I'll repeat what I said earlier again, mate. I'd love it if yourself, Nick or Barker, Les, could get together in a room sometime, because that's really the nucleus there. I suppose if Robin's available, that's another thing. But the three of you could get into a room sometime and just create some new music. It'd be a wonderful thing, mate. I think there'd be a lot of people out there that would be very interested to hear what you come up with.
Well, then I'll tell you what I told Nick. I said, if it's going to be the three of us, we might as well talk to Dan as well.
Okay, there you go. There it is, right there.
So,
well, I wouldn't rule it out.
It's not us that stops it from happening, mate. It's not us.
Well,
there are some issues that he created that would need to be resolved before anything like that happened.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be able to say to you guys, yes, because this is the noise that a few people have made this year. Is there a 20th anniversary Cruelty and the Beast tour? And you have to say, nobody's talked to me about it, and there are some issues that would need to be resolved.
Do you know that he's remixing the album?
I'm sure he is. Like I said, he's always going backwards, that boy.
Because he's remixing. He doesn't. I mean, I understood a lot of people. I didn't mind it, to be honest with you, but I've heard the criticism that the drums aren't the sound that a lot of people would like. They're a bit thin, if you like. But he must have listened to that, and he's gone back and remixed the entire album, not just the drums, but the entire album. He's going to produce new artwork that's a variation of the existing artwork.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, I'm sure I'll hear something about that in the future. I think somebody mentioned, and it might even have had its remix already. Maybe Les told me, or Nick, or somebody. I don't keep tabs on these things. But I don't dislike the sound of it. I would totally agree that the drums are not what they should have been, because this is why I was digging through my cassettes not long ago. I've got the copy before the drum triggers went on. And those engineers that we had were excellent. And Nick's natural drum sound, he had this fantastic Pearl kit, top of the range, looked after, beautifully tuned to perfection. And it sounded extraordinary. And there was never any recordings of us back then of what we sounded like without this. It was emerging technology, the drum triggers. Now you can do it easy and get good sounds. Back then, it wasn't necessarily the way to go, because he is a fantastically dynamic drummer. He's
very good drummer.
I think it lost some of the feel that he had, especially with the snare. I think the snare drum, there's a degree of delicacy that he had produced that's just lost on that record. I don't know, it's a strange word to apply to Nick Barker, but delicacy is the word. He's a very, very good drummer.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and, those who look heavy-handed often have the lightest touch, don't they? So that just proves that statement.
Well, I mean, the triggers were because of the pace he was producing. Obviously, that means that it's not going to be like an AC/DC boom every time he hits the drum. And I think Nick did get a bit caught up in that competitive drumming thing that is still going on now. Nick never had to compete with anybody. He's a musician. He understands how music works. He doesn't just mark out time for you. And that's not a criticism of guys that do. There are some exceptional drummers that are just there to add a groove to the back of it. Nick was absolutely integral to the writing process. And this is not a criticism of Adrian. I wish I'd worked with Adrian more. He's a really good drummer too. is totally different. You know, Nick would always say, Nick Brain. Adrian would always pick out, the name escapes me, dude from Judas Priest, used to be in Racer X, Scott Travis.
Scott Travis, yeah.
Yeah. And I can see that connection, actually. Adrian has got that like a human drum machine where it sounds so precise, but when you play with him, it's really fluid, really human as well. I would have welcomed the opportunity to play more with Adrian because we did play some of the new ideas that never got used together. And actually, this is a different flavour to what I expected because you could ask and you would get with Adrian. You know, it wasn't just a wall of drumming, count to 4 and then do stuff and see what happens. He, like Nick, he listens. And they are almost chalk and cheese, those guys, the way they play. It took a little bit of adjustment for me to play with Adrian because I was so used to playing with Nick when it changed. And there was a guy in between, but we don't talk about him. Forget his name. Yeah. I remember his attitude and his drumming though.
Yes, he played on Of Dark Blood and Fucking, if I'm not mistaken, the one that I can't remember the name of either. I'd have to Google it. But
no, I think that's Adrian.
Oh, so it's the other way around. So the drummer that
was from Extreme Noise Terror, who was friends with Rob and played on his solo record. He did the drums for Cradle to Enslave, I think.
Okay, yep.
It was fragmented at the time because John wasn't there for that release. He didn't play on anything except for the title track, I believe. I think he played rhythm guitar on that one. Okay. But I don't think he's on Dark Blood and Fucking, which I think was a missed opportunity. That was a song that I was hoping to save for the next album. I didn't really want to let that one out as a B-side, effectively.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that point there, yeah. And that just sort of hints to the point that the direction that the band would take after your exit was significant, wasn't it? I mean, so that particular track there, you wrote the main verse riff and the chorus?
I wrote the riffs. That one I knocked up on my 8-track because this is the thing that, people don't want to hear, is we were stretching. And so there was no time. That was literally, this is how this song is. We have to make it happen because there is now a deadline because somebody has opened their mouth and said, let's do an EP. And the record company said, yes. Well,
get it out by Christmas.
Yep. Yeah, I'd already written a ton of music. Why don't we just do the fucking album and release it a month later? Have your video, but release it as a real single. Just 2 tracks was what I wanted to happen. Maybe one of the covers have Sleepless as a B-side or something. But
isn't that interesting?
That was never my end of things.
Because I remember, of course, you can't find the interviews now, and believe me, I searched a ton prior to our discussion and prior to the discussion I had with Danny. But one of the reasons that I believe, now I'm going back almost 20 years ago here, that he, if you like, offered to the media for yours and Les's exit was the lack of songwriting that was occurring. Because
that's spin. He knew damn well, because I would tease him. I'd say, look, here's a little bit of a new song. Now, when I see other people contributing, we can go. Otherwise, you let me get on with what I'm doing. I knew exactly how it had to happen. I wasn't being a tyrant. I know that John used to like firing out that I was a bully. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. If bullying is saying, John, you're the guitar player in a metal band, you've got to play the guitar. I'm a bully, but I don't think that counts. He was sandbagging me constantly. There is, in that folder, the one bit that I genuinely regret nobody got to hear. I was just on good form one day, and me and Adrian by then, sadly, had put together a little riff. And I took it from the recorder at the rehearsal room back to my own studio and started to build on it. I thought, fucking hell, that's that massive outbreak of Maiden-esque twin guitar that we need to be the core of a song. And there was an opportunity as well to record an instrumental for an anime soundtrack. And it had to be a certain length, it had to be a certain style, but it also had to be instrumental, is why it didn't happen. Because Dan had his nose out of joint that he wasn't going to be on it. I did point out that you could just shriek and do stuff, and then technically it's still instrumental, but whatever. And that crushed me because at the end of it, I thought, John can't play that. This is not the most massively technically demanding thing anybody will ever do. But John will fuck that up every time we try and do it live. And he was always sandbagging, but he'd never bring ideas in as a result. Now, I insisted to the very end that all writing credits were everyone. On the grounds that I thought, well, anybody sensible that isn't contributing will realise they're still appreciated. The people who are contributing will be rewarded if there's any money comes of this. Yeah, John especially, and I wasn't going to pick out one person, John was a fucking prick with me at every turn. Everything was just too much trouble for him, where he wouldn't play at the right level. And by that, I genuinely mean he wasn't skilled. He wasn't a guitar player like I recognize, who gets up, does their stuff, plays guitar, and maintains their skill. I've begrudgingly, because it was a democratic process, said, okay, then John can come and play guitar. 2 of us out of 5 said, no, we don't want John to play guitar, which was me and Nick. And I said, look, if he studies, because I'd already started teaching guitar before I joined that band, if he comes and studies with me, he can do this. But it's the bandsmanship wasn't there. Whatever he can play is in isolation. He was off in his own little world. The key to the sound of that band was that everything was as tight could be. Because at that speed, you can't afford anything to go wrong. It's got to be really snug. And so what actually happened was everybody refused to contribute, but they also wouldn't accept that I'd already got, I think it's 7 songs are in that folder, and then tons of little bits that I wanted everyone to work on, because I'm not a great keyboard player. I'm a terrible bass player. There would just be holes left in some of my demos where I wanted a bass line that was cool because I would do something really, really weak. And we had a great bass player to do that for us. But this sandbagging thing just went on, and it's all connected to the stuff I won't go into about what was going on and what was being said when I wasn't there. And it just caused bad feeling over bad feeling. And I believe John got his just desserts in the end, because when it happened for him, apparently he sandbagged Paul Allender constantly as well. He wanted to be the star guitar player. He would actually say to me, your excellent bit of guitar here, can I play that live? No, you fucking can't. You do the cool stuff and you play it. And it turned out he hadn't contributed a cool guitar line. And so he made my life miserable. Oh, it was so difficult, Andy. He genuinely, it's like, in terms of guitar playing, like somebody had strapped a 40-kilo weight to your right hand and you're still trying to play. And everything you did, you had to consider playing downwards to him. So he didn't play all of his guitars on Cruelty. There were a couple of bits where he actually asked me to do one for him. And at that point, the engineers realized that might be the way. And I would pop in and use his stuff just to put the lines in so that they were in time. Ask Nick about John's fabulous timing. Because I nearly told you this earlier on about the writing. John's one contribution to a group effort was, I don't think Nick will mind me telling this story. It doesn't show him in a bad light. And I apologize to him ahead of time if it does. He is a friend of mine, and I tell this because it is funny, not as a criticism of Nick in any way. When we were writing Cruelty, it was really happening. It was fizzing away, and there were loads of ideas floating around, to the extent that it was actually, somebody had to curate it. We all kind of monitored these little parts that we had and the things we wanted to happen, and they grew into one giant thing. And Nick announced when we were taking a break, John, you haven't written anything yet. If you don't write something by the time I get back from McDonald's, I'm going to kick your fucking head in. And we didn't know whether he meant it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But me and Dan took it upon ourselves. During our this kind of half hour we were taking just to chill out before we went back to rehearsing, John, you must have one idea, because if you wind Nick up, he's going to argue with you, it will spoil the atmos, and rehearsal is over for the day, and we're doing really well. And so I got to the point where we said, well, how do you write music? I said, pick a chord, pick a damn chord. There. Now, if it was me, I might play this one next. And Dan even was cheering him on. Going, come on, John, just do something with the guitar. And we wrote a riff with John that he didn't really contribute to it. Yet he wanted to be the center and the star and everything. So it's totally, his world was totally incompatible with what was going on. And that is as true as you like, mate. He did have a riff when he came back, but essentially it was me and Dan saying, no, like this, like that. Where I wouldn't play it for him, I would suggest from the other side of the room, because our guitar amps faced into each other. That way he could walk back and forth and hear if it was working or not. And Nick didn't kick his head in. That riff is a sort of Bathory-style riff, as we used to call it, which is in 13 Autumns and a Widow. But he did try and contact me when he got fired or whatever he did. I don't know the story, but unless he leads with a massive fucking apology, there is no chance of me speaking to that dickhead ever again.
Jesus, okay.
So I won't tell you what the message said, but he caused, I would say, pretty much all of the bad feeling in that band that caused all that chaos in the late 90s. So, and underhandedly as well.
So why didn't
bullshit.
Danny just kick him out of the band then? I mean, if you were especially
Oh,
the way
we threw him out. That's why he's not on some of the songs on Cradle to Enslave. He was dead weight. He's a parasite. You know, he was there. Nick, actually, the first time I thought that was the wrong thing to do, on the Dusk tour in Holland somewhere, I couldn't tell you what town, but we played a show, and me and Nick would do we're in Holland after show 30-minute, and then go out and say hello to anybody that wanted to talk to us. And he went out first and came back and said, "You've got to come and see this, because if I tell you what's happening, you'll call bullshit on it." And I went out, and John was holding court, telling everybody how he nailed that guitar solo in Beauty Slept in Sodom to all these adoring fans. And so we actually had to bollock him in front of people who said, "I thought that's what they wanted to hear." And I was happy to accept that. But it went on and on and on. And I didn't want him to not be there. I wanted him to pull his shit together and play properly and contribute. And if not contribute, accept that I've already written. I write for 2 guitars all the time, even with my band now where it's only 1 guitar player. I just wanted him to understand that I've already got this part. Just play the damn part. It will sound awesome. And that was really, really the big issue with that band ultimately, was John's weird behaviour. So he wasted endless hours of energy on something that could have been sorted out by 30 minutes of hard guitar practice every day. You know?
He sounds like he's got a personality disorder. It sounds like as though he wants to, I had some unwelcome